Restaurant fires, they're a very common hazard and something that is important during inspections. A lot of restaurants are really good about cleaning up the buildup of oil around their kitchens and cooking areas and drains and other places where oils build up. Other restaurants, not so good. They might clean up certain surfaces, but they leave behind this area or up in that vent, they leave certain places alone and they don't touch them for years because they're a pain to get to or whatever. Rather than redesigning, fixing, cleaning, doing what they're supposed to do, they let the oils build up. And that presents a real problem because once a fire starts, if it's got lots of oily buildup, it's really hard to stop that fire. Now, even in a clean restaurant, you can have an oil fire. It's not that, clean restaurants can't burn, but they're much less likely to burn and there's less additional fuel to keep the fire going and getting way too hot before somebody can respond to it. So again, if you know anybody who has a restaurant, clean the drains, clean the fan vents, clean the hoods, clean behind equipment, clean everything because that little oily residue can really take a tiny fire and turn it into a big one really fast. Food poisoning incidents. So this isn't food safety, E. coli contamination or something like that necessarily, but they can get involved in that. Food poisoning is some other contaminant potentially, but it certainly depends on the situation. You never know what caused a poisoning event until you're responding. So who gets jurisdiction or who's responsible depends on what they've determined the cause to be, but we're not going to go into there. What about enforcement? There have been a number of companies that have been cited for violations. In Monterey County, 7-Eleven stores, Duke Energy, Earth Tech, Cal-Am Water, Lens Crafters, Oil Can Henry's was in the news a lot. They were doing illegal disposal of oil products regularly. Monterey County Petroleum and even the National Guard was cited for violations. Cooler inspections. Well, they have to go over the hazardous materials compliance. And so they'll do a walkthrough. They'll look at the interior of your facility, the exterior of your cooler facility. They'll look at chemical storage areas, make sure that it's clean, organized. You have adequate space for aisles between your chemical storage. The appropriate things are being stored together. Some things should be in separate storage areas. You shouldn't store acids with bases, for example. So there are rules on what should and shouldn't be stored together. You need proper signage or placard or signage that says this is a hazardous waste storage area, if indeed that's where you're keeping your old used oils and things. Labeling chemical containers appropriately and fill out the labels completely. And general housekeeping. You want it to look neat. You need to have your response materials. Do you have your spill prevention materials? Rags, pads, pillows, oil, only mops, things that are there in case there is a spill that are appropriate in quantity and location for the materials you have. What about PPE or personal protective equipment? You should know the acronym PPE, personal protective equipment. Do you have the things for handling the materials on your job site? Safety glasses, gloves, aprons, earplugs, boots, etc. Do you have emergency equipment? Do you have adequate placement and inspections of your fire extinguishers? Do you have eye wash stations that are being inspected and run periodically? We had an eye wash station at one site I was at, and it wasn't on my radar. It wasn't in my area, but I just looked at it and said, that doesn't look very clean. I pushed the lever to get the eye wash coming out. It kind of went squirt, squirt, glug with this brown gunk. If somebody really was injured, a rusty water with a bunch of rust chunks is not going to be good on the eyes. So you need to be running those things frequently, making sure you're turning them on, flushing the lines, and it constantly is being inspected to have clean water at the eye wash stations and showers, the emergency showers. Spill prevention equipment. So this is just some pads, and there are different devices that can be used to contain and mop up the problem. You can use these rolls to place in front of a flowing material to absorb it, keep it from flowing further. You can cover sewage areas to stop or slow down the flow of material into the sewer. If it's on your site, you should probably have sewer covers designed in such a way that they can get rid of the rainwater very easily, but they're also easily coverable in the case of a spill. Violation, pretty obvious here. You got a bunch of stuff on wooden pallets or not on a pallet at all. And these old oil drums or chemical drums outside on pallets, on wood pallets, no signage. This is something that used to be very common. It's less common now, but I'm sure there's still quite a few areas with these hiding at people's ranches and businesses out of sight, where the employees don't report it because they don't want to cause trouble or they don't know any better. And Monterey County Health Department doesn't know about it because it's somewhere back on private property. Still illegal. Old forklift battery, you can see the leaking. This is a tremendous violation with the leaking acid outside on an old decaying wooden pallet. No protection from that going directly into the ground. Oil drums overflowing. Yes, this one, at least it has containment. You can see this little brick structure around it. Is that sufficient? I doubt it. But this is a disaster. Not adequate, not adequate. You get the picture. These are not properly handled at all. Oh, hey, you put the label that it's hazardous waste. Good job. Is the label properly filled out? I have no idea. I don't care, because this is obviously a highly illegal way to have drums of hazardous materials. General housekeeping. This is a mess. This is a tripping hazard. There's stuff on the floor. I think this is one of the Oil Can Henry sites where they got violated. I'm pretty sure this is. I think the last one was as well. But this is a mess. You can't get through without tripping over hoses, and it's just safety violations from numerous standpoints, not just environmental health. Discarding waste. This is definitely Oil Can Henry's. I recognize the old Kmart parking area there in off Davis Road near the intersection with Laurel. There's that little shopping center and Oil Can Henry's. I think it's changed name since, but mega violation. They're not allowed to have this material out. So I don't need to go through any major discussions on each of those violations. But here you can see inappropriate containment. These barrels, you can't really tell, but these barrels are on a structure that has holes in it. So it's some sort of metal structure that supports them. If the barrels were to leak, it would go down into this basin underneath, so the barrels wouldn't be sitting in the leaked liquid. It has signage, danger. It has labels on each of the containers. It has proper fill containers on the top. This is much better. It's got some sort of a chain, even though this isn't going to keep somebody out, it's going to keep somebody from accidentally just drifting into the waste oil area. So again, doing it right, properly closed containers, properly labeled, no rust and decay on the containers. Now the plastic ones obviously aren't going to rust, but they certainly can be degradation and cracking and old plastics that need to be retired from use. I'll just call it that. As opposed to this. What is this? Yeah, they tried. They said hazardous waste, but it's just sitting inside of an inappropriate container. This is an animal water trough. This is for your horses or something. And the containers are rusting. This is not as bad a violation as some, but it's certainly not appropriate materials. So record keeping, what do you have to do? There is something called the manifest, and the manifest for hazardous materials is a document that follows the material from cradle to grave, meaning it follows it from the day that chemical was born all the way to when it goes back to a hazardous disposal site. There's also a bill of lading. You don't have to memorize these names or the bill of lading. I do want you to know what a manifest is. Employee training records, storage area checklists, the underground storage tank records, if you have underground storage tank records, spill prevention, control, and countermeasures record keeping, if applicable again. Safety data sheets, formerly known as material safety data sheets, MSDSs. I still see MSDS on binders and on, even if I go to a company's website and I download their SDS, it might say MSDS at the top still. It's taking a good 10, 12 years to get rid of this, but it's fading. They now just call it the safety data sheets. So every single chemical you have on site, you need a binder that has the safety data sheets for what that chemical is that you're storing and how to properly handle it, what the hazards are, how to clean it up, everything. And it has to be something you can put your hands on within a few minutes. So if an environmental health inspector comes to your site or other inspector from OSHA or somebody else, and they say, "Where's your SDS binder?" "Oh, it's right over here." And if you don't have it in their hands within about 3 or 5 minutes, you're in violation. And it has to have everything. I got a warning because I had things in the general employee break room. We had a place where you could wash laundry. We had a mini little washing machine for washing lab coats and things like that. So we had bleach, and we had Comet, and we had Windex, and I don't remember. I think we had a can of Raid because occasionally somebody'd leave out their dessert or their sandwich, and the next morning we'd come in and there'd be ants. So we had a can of Raid, and so there weren't many. There were 4 or 5 things under the kitchen sink in that break room area. We needed an SDS for all of it, even if it's something you can buy at Safeway. You need a record for everything, because now it's a business. Now it is commercial site with employees, and you need SDSs for everything. You also need, as I've talked about earlier, the business response plan, and if applicable, your risk management plan. If with any cooler, unless you're talking about a cooler that has, a tiny refrigerator kind of a thing, you need an RMP. With most ag operations, you have enough diesel or anhydrous ammonia or something that is going to mandate the risk management plan. So the business response plan, in order to require that, a facility stores a threshold quantity of hazardous material, 55 gallons, 500 pounds, 200 cubic feet if it's a gas, or if it generates any amount of hazardous waste. So if you make any hazardous waste, you need a business response plan. If you have hazardous materials in excess of these quantities, 55 gallons, 500 pounds, or 200 cubic feet if it's gas, you need a business response plan, which is damn near anything that deals with any kind of hazardous materials. It details the emergency procedures. If there is a chemical spill or some emergency, employees must be trained and familiar with the plan, and it must be updated regularly. It must contain emergency contacts, and those people and their phone numbers, it better be current. You know, it was funny. I don't remember when it was exactly, but it had a pager number for somebody. And maybe you're not even old enough to know what the hell a pager is, but they haven't been used in a long time. Maybe you're old enough, but certainly in the 90s, pagers were really common. 90s, 80s, 70s. Then they were replaced because everybody starts to get cell phones, and pagers became irrelevant. That obviously meant that the emergency response plan or business response plan contact page, nobody looked at it in years. There was, I think the number 2 person on that list was not employed there, retired like 5 years ago. You got to keep it up to date. It has to have your inventory. It has to have a site map with all kinds of certain details, locations of water sources, locations, or at least large quantity water sources like a fire hydrant hookup. It has to have emergency exit routes, where you go for convening in the event of an emergency, where do employees go, fire extinguishers, on and on and on. Lots of detail have to be on that map, etc. So I'm not going to go over the details here. There's lots of information, the chemical inventory, the site map. This is a very simplistic but effective, simple site plan. If you have certain things, you need to put it. If you don't, you don't. If there are streets with names, you're right next to Main Street, you got to put it. So what are the emergency response procedures? Certainly, you're going to call 911. You're going to call the health department. You need to also be sure that whoever is at the top of your list for the company, who is the main person, you got to get somebody on site who has the authority to be there to answer questions for the emergency responders. The evacuation to assembly area, where is that? Where do employees go? And there might be 2. At one facility, we had 2, depending on the direction of the windsock, because it was a cooler. And if there is, wind predominantly coming off the water from the coast, it was over in Castroville. So if the wind is coming from west to east, which it normally does, well, then you are going to congregate the employees on the west side, where the wind is at your back blowing the stuff away from you. But occasionally the wind turned around. So if the windsock is pointing in the other direction, we meet over there. And that had to be made clear. What are you going to do about first aid, evacuation, scene management, containment and cleanup? All of these things have to be part of your chemical response procedure. You need an evacuation plan for whatever emergencies are realistic, a fire, an explosion, an earthquake, a spill, whatever it is. You need an evacuation signal. What is it? What kind of horn is blown or bell is rung or whatever that is going to indicate that there is an evacuation in progress. What about when there is a release? What if there is a major release of toxic gas or other material, liquid flowing? What do you report? When do you report? Who do you call? So first you have to look at what is a release. Any spilling, leaking, pumping, pouring, emitting, emptying, discharging, injecting, escaping, leaching, dumping, or disposing into the environment, unless you're permitted or authorized by a regulatory agency. So you can, depending on what it is and the circumstances, you can pump, pour, emit, discharge certain things legally. You just need to know how much and where. So there are, for example, discharges of anhydrous ammonia gas that can happen in just a simple maintenance of the facility. How much gas is considered an authorized release and how much must be reported? You need to be aware of that. Better to err on the side of caution. Always assume that anything accidentally emitted is a release. So it's reportable if there's any release of hazardous material which may pose a significant present or potential hazard to human health, safety, or the environment. It must be reported immediately. Now, how do you determine if there is a significant present or potential hazard? Again, you need to be properly trained on that, but if in doubt, report it. So first call 911. They know what to do with these things and spread the word to the appropriate agencies. Then you're going to call your local CUPA office. This is the Monterey County CUPA office, and State Office of Emergency Services, I'm pretty sure. If the amount is released is greater than the federal reported quantity, you also need to call the National Response Center. Now, that's not every employee. There is a person who is trained and has the authority, and a backup person, and probably a backup to the backup, so that you will always, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's always somebody available on this call list who can make that decision. If it's not the person on site running your facility and you have to call somebody, they better be available 24/7. Somebody available 24/7. That's a big responsibility. Training, you have to train any employee. Whenever you hire an employee, before you put them to work, they have to be trained immediately. And then after their initial training, every year thereafter. And you don't want every employee at some odd time. So, if you have an employee brought on and your group training is 6 months down the road, well, you can get them in sync with everybody else by having them join the next group training in 6 months. Then everybody's on the same rhythm. But you need to train about the business response plan, evacuation signal, assembly areas, all of these kinds of things. You need to document it. If it's not written down, it never happened. So you document it and you get employees to sign their training documents, to not only sign that they said they were there when they were there, but they sign something that says what they did in that training. All right.